This video was supposed to be a surprise, long-form critique of Forza Motorsport 2023. Just like I did with Gran Turismo 7 last year, I was anxious to play through Motorsport and dive into the details of every aspect of the game that stood out to me. Normally, I wouldn't have even gotten a chance to play it, but a new controller I was recently gifted for PC came with a free month of Game Pass Ultimate, so I realized this was the perfect opportunity to try the game out brand new. So on release day, I activated the Game Pass, downloaded the game, and jumped in. I of course was following the new Motorsport fairly closely up to release. I thought the game looked great and had impressive visual features in spite of the misleading reveal footage, misleading claims, and the outright lies about things being built from the ground up, despite still using some cars that date back to the original Forza from 2005. I thought the racing looked fun with the practice laps and the sector scoring before you start, in spite of the car progression system that I knew was going to be a tedious grind. But I prefer driving stock or mostly stock road cars in these games anyway. Once I got my hands on it, I was pleasantly surprised by the updated physics. Outside of one issue and some bugs, they feel great, much improved from the previous games, which always had an issue with road feel. Previous Forza titles always felt like spins on gamepad were needlessly common, and needlessly difficult to correct, like you were driving on ice covered in sand that slipped while also trying to suck your car into oversteer. The cars were heavy and slow to respond in general, with every vehicle you try feeling like it's a Hummer full of groceries and kids. This Motorsport though, while still kind of heavy, felt great and largely responsive. My only issue with the controls still seems to be how the steering on gamepad heads back to center. Motorsport still feels swimmy to some extent, because steering seems to head back to center too quickly, upsetting the weight balance laterally, which requires minor correction back and forth over and over. It makes the cars feel twitchy, unstable, and imprecise, while still also feeling slow to respond. The way it's set up just doesn't work for me when we're talking about an inch of travel between full lock to full lock, where you're often going to be returning to center in a quarter of a second or less. The game feels like it needs that return to center to be smoother and more gradual than it is. Of course, people can enjoy the steering feel here perfectly fine. Different driving styles will accommodate for this more or less smoothly, but I know it's an issue with Forza and specifically with Motorsport because it's not an issue I have in any other sim or racing game. Forza is widely considered the least realistic of the big hitters, even with this new entry. So if it was a problem with me not being good enough to handle realistic steering input on gamepad or something, I'd have the problem worse in Assetto Corsa or Project Cars or Gran Turismo, and in those games, it's not a problem I have at all. It's also clearly not a controller issue because I've used many controllers in sims in many different Forza Motorsport games, and this one that I got Game Pass with, the officially Xbox licensed GameSir G7 SE, is considered one of the best third-party controllers you can buy for any platform, competing with and even beating out controllers 5, 6, 8 times its price in terms of mechanical and input precision. It's got a newer, even more precise set of Hall effect sensors than its competitors, and a 1000Hz polling rate, where normal first-party controllers are restricted to just 250Hz. The controller feels phenomenal in every other game, including other racers, and I have my sticks dialed in perfectly. That's not an ad, by the way, just figured I'd mention it's a killer deal, and it's not the issue here. I'll also take a moment to brag and say that given my wins in GT Online, as well as how well I've always done on online time trials and such, I'd wager I'm one of the fastest gamepad sim racers in the world. I can regularly get into the top 4 to 5% in GT7 online time trials, sometimes even within the top 3%, even though that includes wheel racers. And heck, in GT6 and such, I used to get within the top 3,000 people in online time trials, and the top 300 consistently in drift trials. Sometimes I was within the top 500 in the online time trials. And even though it's gotten more competitive since then, I've also gotten better. When you factor in that the vast majority of people competitively playing more hardcore sims than GT are likely all using wheels, and that most of the top 3 to 5% of people even on GT in these trials are using wheels, as well as the reality that most people who are that good aren't going to be sleeping on competing in events like this because they're going to be huge fans of sim racing, it's a safe bet that I'm good enough at gamepad racing to be enough of an authority to recognize when the problem is specific to a game's gamepad controls rather than me. And again, now that the physics in motorsport are significantly improved, I suspect it's an issue with how the game chooses to return steering to center after you return the stick to center. Figured it was important to cover all my bases if I'm going to criticize the game's core controls, even if that criticism is a minor one. For me, the dead zones were also set ridiculously high by default for some odd reason, and steering response was still a bit sluggish in general, which exacerbated the problem. But once I dropped the dead zones and tweaked a few more things, it felt largely solid, aside from that one little swimmy issue. But the point is, even after I started the game up, and knowing what I knew going in, I was expecting something solid, but flaccid, just like GT7's career mode was. If anything, I was hoping to give it a few more points for being brave enough to do grid starts for most races. Instead, I found a revolving nightmare of issues that ended up really disappointing. Most of them would be largely insignificant, or at most worth a sigh and an eye roll, but there are a couple of things that are just so ridiculous that I couldn't ignore them and make the video I'd originally intended. Let's get all the little stuff out of the way first. Performance on PC? Weirdly single-thread focused, meaning it has a tendency to overextend one of your CPU cores whenever a drastic weather or time of day change is coming, and for me, for some reason always during the last half of the last lap of a race. Unless I was on potato settings, it would continue to bounce around between 55 to 60 FPS at these odd points. Textures would also load slowly at times, despite me being on an NVMe SSD capable of 4GB a second read times, which is almost 50% faster than the Xbox Series X SSD with uncompressed data. And that made me realize, I think the issue is that the Series X has its velocity architecture, which is a kinda cringy marketing term for hardware-accelerated asset decompression. Both the PS5 and Series consoles offer hardware-accelerated asset decompression, because otherwise, asset decompression would end up bottlenecking their SSD speeds. But I think on PC they're overusing a single core for this purpose instead. And since I have a Ryzen CPU which is generally weaker at single core workloads compared to the equivalent Intel CPUs, I think that's what's overextending my hardware when it streams in the next major shadow bakes for the time of day system or whatever. For reasons we'll get into later, I never tried turning off hyperthreading. Full disclosure. If that wasn't the issue, the logical culprit would be running out of VRAM, but even on the lowest texture settings and resolutions where I'm way under VRAM budget, I'd have the same issue, and it was never accompanied by major VRAM stutters, nor was that type of issue ever reflected in the game benchmark. Still, surprisingly, when I set most everything to auto and set the game to native 1440p without ray tracing, because DLSS didn't seem to claw back any performance for me for some reason, it mostly locked to 60 FPS outside of menus and pre-post race screens. Graphically, I won't really comment on what that looked like for me. Again, textures regularly completely failed to load across scenes, and auto settings loved to randomly push car textures down really low. I think the game overemphasizes certain weather effects and clear coat gloss paint, especially in the menus. Their paint shader system still seems really rudimentary in a lot of ways. And I also have to stress again that it's unacceptable how they intentionally implied that the game was going to have far greater visual features than you can even access on top-end PC hardware. But once I set it to 1440p, it could look okay. Like, I understand it's a next-gen only title that's going to inherently push my hardware harder. I had a few strange bugs, like lighting suddenly skipping ahead in time of day, or a point where a rear tire randomly jumped to maximum temperatures, causing snap oversteer in a corner. But despite little things like this being a somewhat common occurrence, they didn't bother me that much, certainly on their own. Even the laughable lack of variation in content didn't bother me too much. I genuinely assumed it would be my main point of critique. All you have is online racing, free play racing, and the rather paltry and repetitive list of career events that I've complained about more than enough in previous videos about genre-wide lack of effort put into how sim racing careers are built. This isn't unique to Forza. This game, though, I feel is a step worse. Remember when Forza had interesting events? Simple stuff like drag or drift modes, goofy Top Gear stuff, point-to-point mountain toge tracks? All gone. While I enjoy the track selection here, and particularly gravitate toward the stuff that stands out, like Virginia International Raceway, much of this is the stuff that appears in practically every sim. The amount of fantasy tracks and the variation of them is kind of weak. Right now it's just Maple Valley, a track known as Hakone, which is probably the most visually striking, Grand Oak Raceway, and a speedway known as Eagle Rock, which has some cool variations. But there's nothing to do on them other than practice, qualifying online, and standard races. Car selection is solid, aside from the fact that they're still using several models that are ridiculously outdated, that date back to the very first Forza Motorsport. Though, through all the cars I used, many of which are popular or eccentric standouts like the BRZ, the Starter STI, or the modern Alpine A110, there was basically nothing in terms of visual customization. Some of them only offer like the Forza wing and the Forza front splitter, which still has me wondering if maybe I somehow missed a category, or if more visual parts are just not visible until you level the car up further to unlock them. I doubt it, but I'm trying to find some reason for it, right? I also did get one car to level 50, which took like 4-ish hours. I'll get to why that is, but it was the modern TVR Griffith, which is a car that I adore, TVR being one of my favorite manufacturers, despite how hilariously messy their entire history is. And that car didn't gain any extra visual customization after the first unlock. Speaking of car levels, that's a core reason why this game feels so bland and lacking. You see, each series gives you a selection of cars you can buy and use along the way. You're not limited to just one, but the rate you earn credits if you're just skating through the career with moderate difficulty settings will likely limit you to just one if you don't want to grind credits for each subsequent series. So you buy the car, then you start the first event with almost no customization available. You do the practice, and the car levels a bit. Then you do the event, and it levels even more. After the event, it will tell you what you unlocked for the car, with each level unlocking more parts categories. When you unlock a category, like say tire compound, you have immediate access to every option in that category. So if you want to take off all the rest of your parts to put on racing compound tires, you can. Each level earns that specific car, not the car model, that one car points, to spend on these upgrades, and when you take a part off, the points are all refunded, more or less like an RPG equip burden system. You cannot spend credits on car upgrades, and you cannot touch a category on that car until it's leveled enough to unlock it. The catchphrase for this, which stems from car culture, is built, not bought. This has a multitude of obvious problems, from forcing a grind from square one on every car you change to forcing a grind whenever you decide to switch to a different car, etc. It should usually take around 3-ish hours to get a car to level 50 according to turn 10, but I think that's undershooting it a bit unless you're using a wheel and nailing every apex every race in practice. But the problems are much more numerous than this, and make the whole career structure an unfocused treadmill of endless grind restarts. More than likely, the next series you do won't allow for the same car you already have to be used, so now you get to buy another car and start back at level 1 again. For the most part, the parts you unlock for each car unlock in a roughly similar order. That means you're mindlessly putting the same type of parts onto every car without much thought, because you're so limited. good. At that point, you're not really building anything, so much as just repeatedly buying a new car, tossing on some aftermarket chuff like that college frat boy whose daddy bought him a used mid-2000s Mercedes SLK 350 or Cadillac CT something or other, and then not touching the car again for hours and hours and hours, if ever, because the only reason to do so is if you really like that car. But at that point, you have to find your own ways to level the car up or repeat the series you originally bought it for. Each series is likely to take you around an hour to an hour and a half if you skip practices, or 2 hours to 2.5 hours if you don't. They may get longer as you progress, but I didn't get that far for reasons I will get into. As a related aside, you also cannot alter the length of these career races, unlike something like Project Cars. You can't alter the weather or anything in them either, which is fine, but rain here is still very rudimentary in terms of implementation, and I never ran across a race with 3-dimensional puddles that affected the car differently from the normal surface, like previous games. I wasn't paying super close attention to the racing line grip versus grip on the rest of the track wet, but I also didn't notice any difference. Rain almost always also looks torrential, making it hard to tell how wet it actually is at times. It all just feels very uniform. It's either raining or it isn't, and rain only seems to have like 4 or 5 levels of wetness and intensity, with most of them feeling only incrementally different, looking almost identical, and with the track feeling the same the whole way through. I also don't think there's a surface saturation system, nor a complex surface drying system, meaning as soon as it starts raining, it seems like your grip drops to a predetermined level, and as soon as it stops, it all seems dries uniformly over time, though I didn't get to test this completely for reasons we will get into. Either way, there is no life to this career because of the car leveling system. It doesn't feel like everything was built around this system. Instead, it feels like every concession you experience was included purely as a bandage to justify this system, as a live service style grind. It's like gacha, but without the random loot box drops. Races themselves are all shorter as far as I experienced, and they reuse the same few tracks quite often, with the stranger offerings like Virginia showing up very infrequently as far as I played. This of course could change, and likely does, but at least through the first tier, it's really repetitive. This also affects the tire and fuel wear systems. In what I played of the career, these systems are completely useless. Never once did I see any tire wear at all, and you are never doing enough laps to have to worry about pitting in. And unlike Gran Turismo, at least in the single player, there's no way to accelerate tire wear or fuel consumption on the developer end. So what you do every time if you have tire and fuel wear active is you drop your fuel to just above the necessary amount to finish so that you get faster lap times, and then you forget that both systems exist. Also, it's worth noting really quickly that these systems aren't as new as Turn 10 misleadingly argued they are. I'm not sure about Forza 1 and 3 because I don't have a means of checking them right now, but they had tire and fuel systems as early as Forza Motorsport 2, along with actual endurance events that necessitated using them. In fact, one of the endurances on Maple Valley is the only time in any sim where I've actually run out of fuel because I wasn't paying attention. Considering they acted like these were brand new to the series, it feels remarkably like how EA loves to take features out of Madden or FIFA and then reintroduce them like 5 years later as if they're giving us a revolutionary mechanical feature. Don't get me wrong, it is still worth mentioning their return in the marketing, but don't pretend it's something brand new. Anyway, the game also doesn't actually care if you upgrade your cars or not, making the system once again feel bafflingly unnecessary. It makes sense to a degree because if you switched cars in the middle of a series, or if you're doing worse and getting less car experience, they don't want you to have to grind to keep up with your opponents. But that also means you can drive the car bone stock or at max level, and your opponent cars will always match you. There's no getting a mechanical edge here, just like in previous motorsport titles, unless you are already a highly skilled tuner, and your car is high enough level to tune. If you could unlock categories your own way, that would be somewhat okay. That would give you the option to try and make up for your specific car's weaknesses, or your weaknesses with that car, with clever part management. But since the unlock progression is very similar with each vehicle, that's not really a thing. There is no prioritizing tire compound if they unlock at level 20, and you can only get the car to level 17 before the series is over and the car is useless to you. Also, similar to Gran Turismo 7, this game seems to have a problem where it prioritizes your car performance point rating over the actual parts you equip when balancing your opponents. For a few cars, I tried to focus on upgrades that gave my car more agility, smoother response, more stability, made it lighter, etc., rather than going all in on power. But when my opponent performance was scaled up to compensate, it just assumed I'd have lots more horsepower, and so they'd steamroll me in the straights. But if I focused entirely on power, I'd steamroll them in kind. That same idea can be used when purchasing a car too. Want the edge right out of the box? Don't pick a car you think will handle the best or whatever. Pick the car that will have the best acceleration and top speed. I'm willing to bet it'll give you an unfair advantage at least 9 times out of 10. The point being that none of the career progression or design works together as it was intended. Instead, it feels vapid, unfocused, and repetitive. That's par for the course for sim racer careers, so as I said up top, that's whatever. I could live with that. I would still be criticizing the game for it, but the racing would still be what counts. There are 2 things that absolutely killed the game for me though. One that left me laughing hysterically at how bad it was, and one that caused me to delete the game. Kind of funny that this game has 2 core issues just like GT7 did, which really hurt the experience for me, but unlike GT7, one of these couldn't be overlooked. It couldn't be powered through, and so I had to give up even though I didn't want to. Let's start with the other issue first though, which is that the AI in Forza Motorsport 2023 is unfathomably bad. It has good aspects, sure. It can be pretty fast when left to its own devices, which is the easiest part to get right, but is also the part that can mean the most when you're really digging into the racing. There also doesn't seem to be any rubber banding to speak of, and the fact that basically every race is a grid start or a really tightly stacked rolling start is awesome. The problems from here start small though, and then escalate at an astronomical pace. Because the opponents are so fast, the cars that start up front always get out ahead and maintain really good pace. Unfortunately, that means even though most races are grid starts, every race basically turns into a GT7 rolling start after the first few turns, where you just have to contend with a bunch of track obstacles until you catch up with and actually race the last 2 or 3 cars. If the cars out front are your speed, then the pack racers behind them will inevitably be too slow to be competitive because they get lost in the muck of bumper-to-bumper dogfighting. The front runners always pull ahead of the car closest behind them by like 4 to 9 seconds or so, and the only thing that would ever stop them from increasing that lead was me finally passing them and leaving them in the dust. Once you're literally alongside them, they can also race pretty competitively and can keep pace while staying on their part of the track with an altered line if necessary. However, in my experience, if you come up on any opponent quickly at all when you get alongside, their brains melt immediately. The only time that I felt they were even slightly aware of the presence of opponents, whether that be me or another AI, was when someone was alongside them. But if you're not there 1 second and then you make a good move and are next to them a second later, you'd think they found a spider in their helmet because they consistently veer off away from you as if you have the plague. And almost every time, they would end up way off in the dirt or smashing into a wall at full throttle. As I've mentioned in other videos, in Forza Motorsport 3 they added a pressure system where keeping close to the AI would start causing them to make mistakes. But the system could feel too binary and comical, with them sometimes just suddenly choosing not to brake for a corner at all or whatever. This feels like the same thing, but ratcheted up to 11. If you spook them, they literally dive bomb whatever's in the opposite direction of your car. You'd think that means they're really allergic to contact, and they're just desperately trying to avoid it. but I don't think that's the case. Instead, I think it's just that they don't have any idea how to transition to a different line under duress, so they frantically try to give you space and find something else, unsettling the car and screwing them over. My other issue is much simpler, but kind of relates, and it's why I don't think they're contact averse. Most of the time while racing, AI opponents aren't aware of the player or anyone else on the track. Like at all. AI in sims can normally be a bit wonky on the first few turns of a great start. It's kind of a meme within the genre. They tend to be slow or reckless or otherwise buggy. But here, there wasn't a single race in Forza Motorsport that I can recall where several opponents didn't end up flying into the dirt or spinning like a top when pack racing. At first, I just thought this was the normal AI jitters when in close proximity, but then I realized that they were incessantly smashing into the back of me as if I was parked, or driving directly into my quarter panel and spinning me as if it was intentional. They'd brake way too early for a corner, tap their brakes unexpectedly, or otherwise just be unpredictable with their usage of the brakes at weird times, even when the track was fairly open ahead and around them. And they were doing this stuff even when the pack had started to spread out, laps into a race. Meanwhile, if you're ahead of them on the inside and they make a good move to get alongside, it's likely they don't even see you there, because they'll try to take the usual racing line and grind alongside your car so that you can't even steer properly anymore. Bafflingly, somehow, these AI don't even seem to have any knowledge of the player being in front of or behind them. It's like all they see is the track, or things that have been beside them for a couple of seconds. I was watching some Forza sound comparison and visual comparison videos the other day, and the channel I was on had uploaded one of those old AI comparison videos where they just park in the middle of the track and see how the AI reacts. Usually, I never felt like these videos held much value back when they were super popular during the Forza 3 and 4 and GT 5 and 6 days. Hiding sideways on a blind turn is hardly a realistic test of quality racing AI. But this video was literally doing stuff at points like parking long ways at the end of straights, and the AI in every single scenario effectively didn't see them at all. It would barrel into them at full speed as if they simply didn't exist. Over and over and over. They'd cause pileups when they were bunched up, and smash the player one after another when they were spread out. In the vast majority of the examples, on every bit of track, and in every scenario the video threw at them, they reacted so little to the player's presence that it was laughable. I'd never seen a comparison video with AI that was so unaware, and it perfectly contextualized why it felt like they would ram me and brake check me so viciously. They weren't being needlessly aggressive and racing dirty, they just didn't know I existed in those moments. Realizing that they were skittish when someone pops up alongside made me understand why it so often felt like they would move to block when they were too wide with someone else already, or when another AI came up on them right before I did on the other side. They weren't blocking, they had a spider in their helmet and cranked the steering wheel in fright. Realizing they didn't see each other much of the time either illustrated why every race had 1 to 3 frontrunners pull seconds ahead while everyone else just stayed back as a messy obstacle course. Ultimately for me, it doesn't matter how quality your AI is at putting down track times if they can't race. Most quality sim AI errs on the side of being overly timid, because the developers recognize that a race that's a bit too easy is generally preferred by most people to a race where you get ganked every other passing attempt by some idiot AI that's watching the track scenery pass by. I understand why timid AI can feel slow and poorly crafted when you wish they were more aggressive in holding their positions, but this was just a mess for me every step of the way. These AI weren't aggressive, they were aggressively dumb and unaware. It almost makes me wonder if qualifying for a place in single-player races was part of the intentions originally, but they changed it somewhat late in development purely because they knew people would be livid if they were forced into these skirmishes every time they ended up mid-pack or in the back of the pack. So their half-hearted solution was just to let you choose to start up in P3 or whatever, in case you get tired of the bullshit. Which brings us to the other issue I had to deal with, that made me delete the game and give up on a full critique. Ridiculously incapable AI kinda ruins the game, sure, but it at least has ways around that. A rewind button, the ability to just pick a high starting position, dialing down the AI difficulty, or disabling the simulations of things like penalties. But short of enslaving myself to this game in a repetitive nightmare for the next month, I cannot work around this other issue. Basically, this is how it works. There are 5 tiers in the career that are each separated into around 5 racing series, and each racing series has between 4 to 6 races in it. Then, at the end, you unlock a high-end reward car and can do a race with that. Well, after maybe 10 hours or so, I got to the end of the first tier of the career. I wasn't planning on capturing all of my playtime because sim racing footage is usually really similar the entire time, so I didn't capture the footage of me doing the last series for the first time, because doing fewer capture sessions allows for quicker progression at my own pace. Anyway, I finished the last series, and I went to get into the reward car event, and for some reason it just wouldn't fetch the data for it. You see, Forza Motorsport 2023 is always online. Just like in GT7, you can basically do nothing but arcade races if you're not connected to their servers, and parts of your progression are only saved on their servers. Whatever, minor server bug, no big deal. So I closed the game and I reopened it to see if it fixed the server issue, only to find that 5 out of the 6 races in that final series I just finished were no longer finished. My credits were still what they were, and the car level of my TVR I'd used was still current, but only 1 out of the 6 races was completed. So, I did it all again. Even though I've never experienced anything like this in GT7, server issues happen. No big deal if it only happens once. So, another hour and 15 minutes or so later, all 6 races were completed. And once again, when I entered that reward race, it failed to load the data. And when I reloaded the game, only 2 of the 6 races were completed in the series now. So I finished the 4 remaining races a 3rd time, and then I chose to do another race somewhere instead. I got no server issue and the race finished. Cool, must have just been a bug with that specific reward race, I assumed. So I exited the game and re-entered to see if it saved, just in case, sure that it would be fine. Nope. The extra race I'd done was no longer completed, and only 3 of the 6 races were finished. On and on this happened, every step of the way it only saving 1 more race, until finally I just had the last race of the series to do, and a nearly max level TVR along with 4 of the 5 achievements for beating career tiers that I hadn't even touched up to this point. But this time, when I finished the last race, it gave me the achievement for specifically finishing that last series of the first tier, rather than the one for finishing the final tier like I'd expected. It seemed fixed, finally, but I was obviously on edge. Still, now that the series was complete, I could do the reward race, finally. I did it, and exited the game to check to see if it had saved my progress, and the reward race was incomplete again when I went back into the game. How many more times would progress just decide not to save, removing hours from my life for no good reason? I couldn't tell, and I wasn't willing to risk it, so I deleted Forza Motorsport 2023 because I'm not dealing with that kind of trash fucking bullshit. I'm willing to leave a bit of room for Turn 10 to justify this game being always online, for the same reasons I justified it in my GT7 video. If they have plans for high-end, professional esport racing that they don't want to risk cheating being a part of because they have important partners to please, that's fine. As of now, there isn't any such justification, so they're just making it always online to make it always online. But that can change, since this game is already trying to be more pro-racing oriented. But there's no excuse for Microsoft having these sorts of ridiculous server issues at launch without even any in-game warnings while you're playing that tell you if there's server instability, or that the server save failed. You just have to hope it works out and you come back to the progress you actually put in. Heck, it doesn't even have a GT Sport style manual save button that I can find. Your fate is in the hands of Microsoft servers. Yes, the servers for GT7 went down for a bit over 24 hours near launch, but that was manually done by Polyphony because they had found a rare save wiping glitch and wanted to minimize how many people were affected. They took the servers down and they patched the game as fast as possible. Shit happens. As of writing this, Forza's next patch is supposed to be over a week away, all while this issue just goes unchecked. I don't even know if the patch will fix this issue. And this is a game backed by Microsoft, which is one of the most powerful tech companies and one of the richest companies in the world. Hell, just the Xbox division of Microsoft is bigger than all of Sony. Motorsport specifically is a series that usually sells like a fifth of what GT does, so it's hard to imagine that even with Game Pass, too many more people were accessing Motorsport 2023 than GT7. And Microsoft should know and be able to prepare for the level of extra players Game Pass might bring anyway, especially at this point in Game Pass's lifespan. And to be fair, as far as I know, this isn't a problem on Xbox, only on PC. Other than that one intentional server outage in GT7, I still have never had a single server connection issue in GT7 or GT Sport after like 700 combined hours of play. And when my internet is being shaky, the game gives me warnings when it fails to save, or when the server connection is spotty. It lets me know not to leave without prioritizing making sure my progress is saved. When the servers are going down for planned maintenance, you know about the exact time frame of it days in advance from updates shown on the main menu, and a timer will appear in-game like an hour before the servers actually go down. There is no excuse for this. It's ridiculous. It's horseshit. I can only imagine how much more upset I'd be if I was someone saddled with internet data caps and I wasted over 100 gigabytes of data in order to save this experience. Or someone who bought the game or even the deluxe edition. And you know what? It sucks that this is the video I had to make instead of what I wanted to. I've since deleted the game and installed Forza Horizon 4 to play that for the first time instead, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it so far, but I still want my new sim racer fix. I want to go back to a Forza Motorsport without the awful AI, and without weird frame rate stutters. The progression and content is anemic and pretty weak, and the cars are a little wobbly on gamepad, and their AI is an absolute joke that I'm still left speechless by every time I think about it. The sound is overkill on tons of cars, as if everything is a modern muscle car with a racing exhaust right out of the box. The game also expects you to spend an arm and a leg on DLC packs day one, and clearly is inspired by live service nonsense to keep people playing, so that they stay subbed to Game Pass. This isn't a great game by any means, even without the server crap. It's absolutely a disappointment. But I still could have very much enjoyed it, and would have had a much more positive video in spite of that without this server issue. The game's core physics still feel really good. Having a car step out and catching it, or letting it slip into that drift and just holding it, or knowing that a car with a lot of grip will actually hold on to that grip for once in this series, it feels great. Doing practice laps where I try to perfect all the little sectors is incredibly addictive. The career being focused on series where each place earns you points so that getting first on every race isn't necessary, and I can test myself by starting further back on the grid, feels fucking great. Sure, the game has the same AI drivers finish in the first few positions over and over again, so you basically still have to podium in each race to win a series, to save yourself another 2 hours of redoing the whole thing if you get second overall. And the game is still focused on getting first in every series, even though that's not realistic to racing. But at least I don't have to get first in every stupid race. I want to keep playing a version of this game that works, but it doesn't. And whether I bought the game at full price, bought Game Pass, or got a free trial of Game Pass, this dumb shit isn't worth my time. I've got better things to do than accept that multi-trillion-dollar daddy Microsoft just lets one of their big 3 game series release in this awful of a state on PC after 6 years of development. Every previous Forza game got 2. For shame. Do better, especially given all the shit people gave GT7 for the comparatively phenomenal state it released in, and how they handled their similar game save issue. It's sad that the other game I'm playing through on Game Pass right now is Starfield on PC, and that, a Bethesda game, has so far been infinitely more polished. Sure, it's a heavy game to run, but it works. If you can play Forza Motorsport on Xbox, by all accounts it seems like a bland and lifeless but incredibly solid option that functions. And some people I know have gotten lucky on PC, but I and many others didn't. And the extent to which we got unlucky is just frankly unacceptable. Do fucking better, Microsoft, and stop lying in all of your goddamn marketing.